The other very important thing about workplace sensitivity is emotional and mental health, wellness. Our archaic leave policies, our provisions, our culture, our entire system of the HR rules and regulations, they are all developed on a sense of physiological illness. When we have a panic attack, we call up our boss and say that we are running temperature, because there is a stigma, because it is not accepted, because the awareness is low. We, and especially with this time of COVID-19, when mental health has really got the much delayed and much deserved focus, it is high time that we take this opportunity and we work on those policies. And why just policies? The culture of stress. If you think of it, the workplaces, they have always worked with a culture of fear psychosis. What will happen if I don't finish it? Instead of an innate motivation, instead of that drive, that push, that vision oriented, goal oriented action, we are always working under a fear psychosis. There is a immediate reward reprimand structure, and it is not exactly the atmosphere in which a human creativity can thrive, because when we are stressed, when we are afraid, we are in a flight and fright mode. We cannot be creative, we cannot think out of the box. So it is high time that we move consciously, steadily out of that fear psychosis way of motivation into a stage of vision, a leadership goal, a storyboard, where we feel essentially a part of the vision that we are working upon, and then we take ahead our action. Productivity would not suffer. In fact, there will be multiple perspectives, there will be creativity at work that we are essentially missing out in this structure of goal driven, fear driven psychosis. When I work with workplaces, especially with team culture, there are a few things that I'm going to give away that I use a lot, especially the model of ACE. By ACE, I mean awareness, communication, and empathy. Awareness, communication, and empathy are essential to thriving in a conscious workplace. What do I mean by awareness? Awareness first begins as a lot of individual work, self leadership. Am I aware of what means success? How do I define success? What is my medium term, short term, or long term goal? How do I see my career versus my job? Am I aware about the people around me? Am I sensitive towards their needs? Do I carry my authentic self to work? Am I free enough to speak out what I feel? Am I aware of my creativity, my strength, as well as my weaknesses? And at this point, I have to say that we should not try to be replicas of each other. Each of us as individuals are imperfect. We are supposed to have some strengths and some weaknesses. How we play up our strength, how we work around our weakness, that can only be attained in an emotionally safe atmosphere. If we have to get defensive, if we have to pretend we can do all of it, if we have to be substitutes of each other and replicas, it would not work. We are essentially a collaborative team. So I feel that awareness sits at the very fundamental basic of a good conscious workplace. To be aware of self, and then to also be aware of my surrounding, of my colleagues, of my teammates, of my leaders, of my boss, of my supervisor, of my subordinates. Because at the end of the day, you have to look at each of them as people. You are here to solve a problem for a bigger vision, for an organization goal, and we are all in it together. That awareness, that inner work becomes essential to be able to thrive in a conscious workplace. The second thing I keep talking about is communication. Communication isn't one of the things that our standard archaic education system teaches us, because we often get into the mode of rote learning and learning to score marks, and then racing in a rat race to get the next admission to go to a good college, crack the next job, get the next promotion. In that entire structure, communication is important, but it still becomes a secondary goal. We are not conscious of our communication. Essentially, when I work on communication with teams and with leadership, I look at the four essential tenets of communication, which is listening, speaking, reading, writing. Notice that I say listening first and speaking next, because we have to understand to be understood. We talk about reading and writing. We are expressing in written words all the time. In fact, more so now that we are in lockdown, people cannot see our body gestures or our voice. We are having so much of written communication. Are we empathetic? Are we asking people how they're doing before we tell them what we want from them? Communication is an essential word. Communication is not just our external feature. Communication is deep down inwards. Communication is actually an essential character building. The third tenet of my structure with which I work at Lighthouse is empathy. In the ACE model, it is the third A, C, and then E, empathy. Empathy is to understand the other. Oftentimes we get lost in our own victim stories. You know, my boss is bad, my colleague is bad, he did this to me, she did that to me. While some of those are real, are objective, are very essential to talk about and solve, at the same time, do we realize that each one of us, we are people first, we are individuals? Again, to reflect on the current times, on the COVID-19 situation, I do feel that this has brought up empathy in workplaces like none before. Because now we do recognize that the colleague who used to sit next to me, he now has a family, he now has a little child who comes in while we are having a video conference. So there is the human side, and we have to appreciate this human side of people. To embrace the other is becoming the most important superpower of the future. To understand another perspective, to understand things, to look at things from another vision, another point of view. Together, I feel that conscious workplaces are going to be a requirement for the future. We can no longer just look at the bar charts and the pie charts and give clinical leadership messages and tell people to follow our footsteps. It is falling out. That entire structure, that fear paradigm, it is falling out. People are now at a door of a shift of consciousness, and workplaces can only survive if they match steps with that shift of consciousness.